The thing about the mushroom, right, as I was mentioning earlier, is that in a mushroom, you have 0.03% cordycepin. So you would have to eat like a huge amount of mushroom to get anywhere near the amount of cordycepin that we're putting in these products. In fact, it's the most cordycepin in any other product out there on the market right now. If you find cordycepin out there, it's typically going to be in sort of mushroom blends, like standardized to a certain amount. But we went directly the synthesis pathway. So once Dr. Ted did the initial research, we figured out the power of this thing to work in so many different ways, as we've been alluding to here. We decided to synthesize it, with a lab and make it at a higher potency that's ever been made, ever before. If you were going to eat the mushroom, you'd have to have like 80 grams or 150 grams of mushroom itself to get the amount of cordycepin that we're putting in these particular products.
My friend, Dr. Scott Sherr, he's a board certified internal medicine physician, and he's been on the podcast before. We actually did this big podcast all about, this is a mouthful, gamma aminobutyric acid, this inhibitory neurotransmitter that Scott kind of figured out how to unlock higher levels of with these special, they're called troches that you dissolve in your mouth. He's also responsible for a lot of people walking around with the so-called Smurf mouth because he has helped to formulate some pretty potent methylene blue troches. And he's a real expert on hyperbaric oxygen too. I mean, we covered a lot of that in our last podcast, Scott. And for those of you listening,
we did. Yeah.
Well, I'll link to those if you go to bengreenfieldlife.com/Sherr, SHERR, which is Scott's last name, bengreenfieldlife.com/Sherr. But Scott recently reached out to me, and like I've come across all sorts of crazy molecules and compounds and mushroom extracts and what have yous. And he was talking to me about this ingredient called cordycepin, and it was so interesting. A lot of you are familiar with cordyceps. So interesting that I want to have him back on to just talk about that, but also some of the newer innovations that he's been working on behind the scenes anyways, because he's always got some cool new trick up his sleeve. Whenever I see you at a conference, Scott, you've got like some new little square I'm supposed to put in my mouth to unlock superpowers of some level or other.
I work with some fantastic people, as you know, Ben. And so, Dr. Ted, who you've had on the podcast as well, Dr. Ted Achacoso. And so we're always, I'm usually patient 1. Patient 0 is Boomer Anderson, who's the CEO of the company. So we're always trying different molecules and different combinations. And it was actually Dr. Ted that found this really cool compound in the cordyceps mushroom that we've been able to leverage, pretty dramatically overall in a couple of different of our formulas. You were talking about sleep. We spoke about sleep last time when you and I had a chat. And so it has some relevance there. It also has relevance from an immune system perspective, anti-inflammatory perspective, and more. So it's a fun one. And we're always looking at more tools and tricks and things up our sleeve, as are you, so that's why we're such, we're definitely, we're aligned in mission in that capacity.
Yeah, I want to talk more about the cordycepin thing, but you work with Dr. Ted Achacoso, who's been on the podcast before. Some people say he certifiably has a really high IQ. Is there something to that?
Yeah, supposedly. That's not supposedly. He was tested many years ago. He has an IQ between 180 and 210, which I guess after you're 16 standard deviations above the mean, you don't get an actual numeral number, you get a range. What Ted likes to say is that when he's at 220, he doesn't like anybody and can't relate to anybody. When he's 180, he can actually kind of relate to people. So, that's the range, and he kind of knows where he is every day, depending on what his relationship to other people feels like that particular day.
What do you mean? Does it fluctuate based on what chemicals he's consuming, or does it just fluctuate naturally?
I would say probably both, knowing him. But I think it's just the way the system or the way the test works that after a certain amount, you don't get an actual number, supposedly. So yeah, when you meet somebody like Dr. Ted, you expect somebody that can't really relate to other people, right? Because if you have that high of an IQ, you don't seem to know what other people are talking about most of the time. But what he's been able to develop over many years is more of as almost of a high as an EQ as well, an emotional quotient at the same time. So very, very rare person to be able to kind of go across both realms. And, he's obviously very skilled in lots of different tools, techniques, practices, ancient, new, cutting edge, everything. And so he's able to synthesize a lot of information from all different types of areas. And now, with leveraging of AI, it's been kind of ridiculous. So it's been fun to watch, but also to be the recipient of having to figure out how to make things actually work has been interesting for us as a company.
Yeah, from like a chemical standpoint, obviously there's a whole world of nootropics and smart drugs, from the Navy SEAL provigil modafinil approach to the biohack or plant medicine or other compound approach. But I think when it comes to verbal fluency or word recall or memory, that a lot of those things can upregulate your ability to tap into those skills at a higher level. I still think, though, you need input, right? Because I think somebody who's uninformed, if you were to give them, let's say, I don't know, a microdose of LSD or something like that, they may not actually spew as much knowledge at such a rapid feed you through the fire hose pace as somebody who actually has a great deal of input going in, right?
You have to have a huge amount of input coming in to be as voracious as somebody like he is or like you are, for example, to be able to bring out the things that they do. So this is where AI has become a little bit more interesting, right? Because now you can consume a huge amount of information and then synthesize it across multiple different specialties. And so that's what we as a company, we're actually working really hard on overall with our nonprofit side, actually, which is creating more of the practitioner of the future as well. So giving the practitioner the tools that they need to be able to work alongside AI. I mean, that's really what's going to happen, right? And then we formulate the same way, right? That's Dr. Tez on, using various types of AI models to create different formulas and various, and, do all your experimenting without actually having to make the compounds in our combined compounds together is very, very cool. And so that's, one of the reasons and how we actually came up with the idea of actually just sticking with cordycepin, for example, or how you combine cordycepin with methylene blue, or how you can combine it with caffeine and all these other kinds of aspects we can talk about. But then you can sort of test these in the real world and say, does this really work or not? And that's what's really cool about kind of what we do. We're kind of, we are really integrating a lot of different types of tools, tech, but the knowledge base, obviously he has a huge knowledge base, Dr. Ted, but we also leverage all the new, these other knowledge bases that are available now as well. And then it's the world is our oyster, man. It's been fun.
And how close are we? Let's say that you do have an AI model trained. Let's say for a guy like you who just wants to have a deep knowledge of all things related to the biochemistry of brain or body enhancing compounds. How close do you think we are to you just being able to wear a special pair of glasses or a watch or something like that will cue into verbal questions that I'm asking you right now, you're on a podcast and the answers are just getting flashed right there on the insides of your glasses and making you sound super smart, even though you're just augmented with AI. You think we're close to something like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think it's very far away at all. I mean, at this point, these things are almost real time as far as answering or asking questions or listening to information, even verbally now. So I think we're super close to people having, your classic sci-fi AI thing on your glasses while you're listening to a podcast. Maybe that's what you're doing now, Ben. I don't know, but I'm definitely doing it. I'm just kidding. I'm not. but it would. I think it's going to happen. It means we're getting more of these agenting systems, right? So people are using AI in a way to help them do automated tasks instead. And so that's really cool. And so we're looking at various ways to do that for practitioners, right? So as you know, Ben, we have a nonprofit organization called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, and we're training practitioners on how to optimize health. And we have a 7-module certification for practitioners. And it's based on Dr. Ted's initial framework that he brought over from his clinic, in Manila that he was working on for many years. And the idea is that you learn this foundational approach using metabolomics, epigenetics, gut immune system, focused on optimizing health rather than treating disease. But the key for all of this is that you still have to interpret data, right? And you still have to be able to crunch a lot of numbers from various types of sources, whether it be gut testing or metabolomic testing or whatever. And so using, AI programs that, we design to be able to crunch that data in a very sort of in a way that's very much the perspective that we think about, which is not just here's a number, here's a result. It's how do you network wide everything together, right? How you throw a network together and then balance everything to when you were 21 and 30 years of age. So all of the nutrients and gut and hormone levels that we look at in the whole framework are focused on optimizing somebody to be 21 to 30 years of age, not just normal for your age, which is not what most people want to be unless they're 21 to 30. So you don't want hormones of a 65-year-old 12-year-old typically, right? You don't want to have, the B vitamin levels of somebody that's 45 years old if you're 20 years old or something like that. So just to give examples, so we're kind of putting all this together, and it's kind of a newer framework that we're really excited about. And hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, we'll have more to share. But it's the idea here is that we are no longer just human. We already know this with our smartphones, but now with AI, it's an entirely different level of being able to really augment what we do. And as a practitioner, that's really great news, because, most of us are relegated to having to see one person at a time, right? But if you can do it in a way that you can scale yourself without, but then you can also go to the beach and hang out while your models and other things are talking to everybody's talking to your AI while you're hanging out someplace else with your kids. That's pretty cool. So that's what we're working on.
Yeah, I still think it might create a little bit of friction when you take the glasses off or you remove the augmentation. And I don't know, you go into your family and you almost might have to learn how to interact with people in two different environments, one where you're augmented and one where you're the native you. I think you're like right on. And in general, this is what we think about when we think about sort of ancient practices like meditation or Buddhism or something like that, right? Well, the idea is that we all have these roles that we play, and some of them are much stronger than others, right? And sometimes we get attached to them, and people are going to definitely get attached to this augmented human Ben, that, that has AI, right? Or augmented Scott, but having to or detach or unattach from those roles is going to be hard. It's going to be hard. And it's already hard for people because these are addicting technologies. So I agree with you. I think there's going to be a lot of challenges along the way. But I think in the end, if it all works out, in sort of sunshine and rainbows, it should be your AIs are doing all your work while you're hanging out with your family and actually, not plugged in for once, right? I think that's the hard thing for a lot of us is to have that time when we're not on our phones, when we're not, in that sort of environment where things are just getting thrown at us at 100 miles an hour. Yeah. And it feels more natural to be native. I mean, I'm doubling down on that with my sons who have been in wilderness school since they were 6, are still every single day doing a Kamana wilderness awareness program, with Native American lineage borrowed, sit spots outside each day. They're going on a 10-day vision quest here in a couple of months out in the Sonoran Desert.
Wow,
they
nice.
Are doing, mentors and training for other kids, fathers and sons who are going to wilderness survival school up here in Idaho. And because of all that, they're probably not as good at prompting AI as some of their peers
okay.
might be.
Yeah.
But I like that. This is just a silly way to think about things, I know, but if there was a solar flare or some mass electrical outage that, at least my sons are going to be able to survive without the augmentation,
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way to think about it. And you've been able to create that pretty significantly in your own space. I think like everybody that's a parent here, it's hard to have, and as I have 4 kids, as you know, Ben, I think, and it's also very hard to integrate, the work that we're doing and all this advanced tech and cutting edge science and things like that, and then come back and try to, make sure everybody's grounded at the house at least, right? And I think that ground is the hard place to find, but it's possible, I think, but it's not something that just comes. You really have to actively work on it in all the various ways that you do and that that I do, and with my kids too. So
yeah. Well, let's talk about nature's technology. Tell me about this cordycepin stuff.
Yeah, I mean, but cordyceps, the mushroom's been around a long, long time, right? And it's been around for thousands of years as a sort of delicacy in the world of Chinese medicine, in the sense of it was very rare initially to find this cordyceps mushroom. It used to grow just on the backs of caterpillars or in very rare places and high in the Himalayas overall. But now it's actually been industrialized. You can get more of it. I'm
going to interrupt you super early on, just in case people tune out. I realize that many of you have heard of cordyceps. We're not really going to be talking
right
about cordyceps per se. It's just the starting off point, because I know cordyceps already is kind of saturated in the market.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the idea to get the story really is that the cordyceps is really cool because it takes over the nervous systems of insects, makes them into zombies. So if you've watched The Last of Us on HBO, that show is about a cordyceps mushroom that's gone mutated and now it's affecting humans, and there's a zombie apocalypse and everybody's dying and, all those kinds of things. But it doesn't affect humans. It just affects arthropods like ants. And so it takes over their nervous systems and makes these ants go to certain areas in the forest to where they're going to make the most mushrooms, basically. So it's been of interest for thousands of years because how does this mushroom take over the nervous system of an insect, basically dysregulate their entire immune system, their neural pathways in a way that allows them to make more mushroom, right? So there's a lot of compounds in the mushroom. there's polysaccharides, there's vitamins, there's minerals actually. But the most active component of the mushroom itself is something called cordycepin. And this is only by weight about 0.03% of the mushroom. So it's not a huge amount of the mushroom, but a lot of the power. Most of the power of the mushroom itself is because of this compound called cordycepin.
A fitting analogy would be like psilocybin and mushroom extract. Like psilocin is the very psychoactive component of that mushroom that if you concentrate has a lot of the psychoactivity. With cordyceps, it'd be cordycepin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So cordycepin, and just like psilocin, it's a very small amount of the mushroom itself, but the potency of it is, very significant as far as what it does in the mushroom overall, right? It has the mushroom has other ingredients. It has other things in there. It has, even things like, so polysaccharides and vitamins and things like that. But in essence, what cordycepin is in our body is an adenosine analog. And adenosine is got a lot of different roles in the body. People have heard of probably adenosine triphosphate, right? So adenosine triphosphate is how we make energy. And then we also have adenosine in the brain that works as a neurotransmitter. It also works in the heart. It increases nitric oxide production. So basically what cordycepin does is have a massive effect on the adenosine system in the body. And as a result of that, it has all these various pathways that it can regulate or downregulate depending on the system that we're talking about. Everything from decreasing inflammation by going and decreasing the NF-kappa B system itself. So NF-kappa B is a system in our body that gets upregulated when we have inflammation. It can get really messed up if you have chronic inflammation. You get pro-inflammatory cytokines that just hang around for a while, like TNF alpha, interleukins, things like that. On the other end of it, it can increase things like AMPK activation as well, which boosts things like mitochondrial biogenesis and fatty acid oxidation. And then so you have the capacity to actually make more energy from fat specifically and actually preserve glycogen when you have cordycepin around. So, we can talk about some of the various, questions you have, but like in essence, it's adenosine analog that has, fantastic effects on like multiple different pathways related to how adenosine works in the body.
Well, you guys just have it in one of your products at Transcriptions, right?
So we have it in two different products, actually. So we have it in Trozy. Trozy is 8 different ingredients, and some of those ingredients are related to the GABA system, which we talked about in your last podcast. But the cordycepin itself, the way it works here is that cordycepin, as I mentioned, works on the adenosine system, right? And so adenosine is a neurotransmitter in our brain that helps us feel sleepy. It gives us sleep pressure. So this is why when you exercise more, actually, you have more sleep pressure because you're making more free adenosine. So obviously, if you're making more energy throughout the day, you're going to making more ATP. You're going to be making more adenosine.
ATP is adenosine triphosphate. When you split those phosphate bonds, you're left with free-floating adenosine.
Right.
And so what you're saying is that adenosine could then bind to adenosine receptors and increase sleep drive. So maybe the person who frequently works out, who doesn't one day and has trouble falling asleep, that might be the case because they have less adenosine, and they could theoretically use something that produces more adenosine to help with that.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly. Yeah. And this is, it's very common actually. The more adenosine you produce, the more of a sleep drive you're going to have. But if you're used to a certain amount of sleep drive and you don't do it as much that day, you may not be able to sleep as well that night. And so what cordycepin can do is it comes in and acts just like adenosine as a neurotransmitter. And so adenosine makes you feel sleepy. It gives you sleep pressure. The best experience of this is obviously in children, right? Like if you see your kids and they're young and they need a nap and they don't get a nap, they get really, really angry, right? This is sleep pressure. This is adenosine that's built up throughout the day or the hours if you're obviously a baby in that case or young. And so what we can see here with cordycepin is it acts just like it. And so the most important corollary to this is what blocks adenosine receptors in the brain is caffeine, right? So caffeine makes you feel more wakeful by blocking the adenosine receptors directly. And so people that drink caffeine, that's why they drink it. And so if you don't allow the adenosine to bind, you're going to feel more wakeful overall. So there's actually a cool stack you can do with cordycepin where you can actually give somebody caffeine first and then have them take some cordycepin. And then instead of going to the brain where it's going to cause you to make you actually feel more sleepy potentially, it can go to the rest of the system to help you make more energy, with the AMP activation, increase nitric oxide production, and actually significantly significantly improve like immune system modulation at the same time.
Are you talking about caffeine receptors outside the central nervous system, or just caffeine receptors still in the central nervous system but outside the brain?
Yeah, so caffeine receptors in the brain. So caffeine receptors in the brain are going to block the adenosine neurotransmitter.
Blocking those. What I'm saying is, if caffeine is going elsewhere,
yeah,
like a lot of people aren't aware of this, which is why I'm asking. Like caffeine can act in other places besides your brain.
Sure. It works on other organs. It works on the vagal nerve, other places too as well. But in essence, what we found is that the primary aspect of adenosine working in the brain, cordycepin will modulate in a positive way, so it'll help there. But at the same time, it's also going to help systemically as well. So in the sense that you take cordycepin, it's going to improve your immune system function. It has some roles of decreasing inflammation, immune system modulation, as I mentioned. It actually activates various things. And so I think the main thing that we've seen, at least clinically overall, Ben, is that if you have caffeine on board and you take cordycepin, you don't feel sleepy. Some people that take cordycepin, especially at higher doses, will feel a little bit sleepier if they take it, because it's going to increase your sleep pressure, because it's going to work just like adenosine, for example.
It makes me sleepy, by the way. Even the immune one makes me sleepy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So then in our Trommune, which is a higher strength of the cordycepin, so there's 40 milligrams of cordycepin in the Tro-Z. In the Trommune, we have two different strengths, of 75 milligrams and 150 milligrams. Typically, we have people taking those in the evenings because it's going to increase your deep sleep. If you track it with your Oura Ring, whatever kind of tracker you have, you will notice when you're taking the cordycepin or the Trommune that your deep sleep will increase overall. What you may see in corresponding is a slight decrease in REM sleep over time, but it's very, very small compared to your increase in deep sleep overall. And so we have a lot of people actually that will take the Trommune on its own as something just purely to increase deep sleep. And, obviously when you're getting better deep sleep, your immune system is going to work better overall, right? You're going to have more anti-inflammatory support. You're going to also notice that like your immune system is going to work better overall if you're getting better sleep. So it's a combination of things, right? So if you're working on deep sleep on its own, it's obviously going to help in a lot of different ways, but there's the corollary effects of Trommune or cordycepin on the immune system itself, including improving B cell activation and natural killer cell activation, like optimizing macrophage function, which are, macrophages are, things that go to like areas where there's inflammation, but actually down regulating some of that as well, and improving lymphatic detoxification too of the brain.
Yeah. I pulled up my phone now because I'm ignoring you. I'm looking at my deep sleep scores because I took it on Thursday and I took it on Sunday. Thursday, I had 31% deep sleep. Let's see, Friday, 24, Saturday, 17, Sunday 37. See, I was in the 30s on the 2 nights I took it. You're right. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, it's, with deep sleep is where we do a lot of our consolidating of our memories, right? This is where we can do our deepest detox as well. Most people don't realize that like at stage 3 and stage 4, your deep sleep, where you get most of your immune system reorganization in the brain too. So our lymphatic system is really, really highly active during deep sleep, especially. And the other cool thing about cordycepin, which I didn't mention yet, is that it's also an anti-infective at the same time, because it actually inhibits RNA synthesis in viruses and tumor cells as well. And it does this so there's a potential indication in cancer as well. And the reason why that is because one of our base pairs is adenine, right? And so adenine is also it's based off of adenosine. So what happens in rapidly dividing cells is that you have the cordycepin that can come in there and block halting viral RNA replication and also potentially tumor RNA replication too. And so, triggering like a stop in that replication. So it's fantastic as an anti-infective, especially for viruses overall. So we have a lot of people that use it when they travel, of course, like when they're going to a place like on an airplane. If somebody's sick in the house, I took it for a year straight and I didn't get sick once in my house, which is pretty unusual when I have 4 kids here that are, in school and coming home sick on a reasonable clip. I give it to them as well and they do great. So it's got this inflammation downregulation. It's got this capacity to also help you with the actual infection itself, and that's actually where I've been using it most in like a lot of my patients is as an anti-infective, and with the deep sleep piece as well.
I think, and I know you got to be careful because you're a practicing physician, but I think it was you or on your guys' website that I saw some stuff about cordycepin and cancer.
Yeah, so it's not on our website. We might actually have a blog on it, the Transcriptions blog. But the reason why is that exactly what I just mentioned here is that there is the capacity to block RNA replication in rapidly dividing cells and triggering apoptosis, triggering the death of the cells that are rapidly dividing overall. So as a result of that, you're getting to this idea where you can stop the growth of a rapidly dividing cell, which oftentimes is going to be maybe a cancer cell, right? So that's one thing that we're seeing. And then it's funny because when we first started looking at cordycepin as a compound, we were looking at it for sleep specifically. And then when we were doing some of the research, and then all of a sudden these studies came out in cancer, at least in animal models, and the price of the ingredient went up pretty dramatically after that, as you can imagine, to get it. But that doesn't stop us, of course. But it's not being used that way clinically yet, although there are a couple compounds that are like it that are being looked at as drugs overall in cancer. So the technical term for cordycepin is called 3-deoxyadenosine. And so basically, we have adenosine we just talked about earlier that cordycepin looks like and acts like adenosine, but it's a little bit different. It has something called 3-deoxyadenosine. And the nice thing about that as well is it's more longer acting. So adenosine in our body is very, very rapidly acting within about a couple seconds to a minute. The half-life of adenosine is gone, right? It's over. Where with 3-deoxyadenosine lasts for like 4 to 6 hours, which is much longer in the body as well. And so that's why it can help you, for short periods of time, but then also helps with this immune modulation, which can, benefit you more long term. But from a cancer perspective, it's super interesting, and more research is happening here all the time, especially in breast, liver, lung, and prostate. Those are the ones that there's some research coming out.
Okay, got it. So the adenosine piece. I mean, a lot of people use creatine for performance to replace some of the phosphate groups. The creatine phosphate is replenishing from exercise. So if adenosine is present in the cordycepin, like theoretically, I'm not theoretically, I'm actually curious about the research, if there is any, like when it comes to performance, strength, speed, power, even, and this would be more theoretical, I'm guessing, stacking it with something like creatine phosphate, so you're replenishing adenosine triphosphate more rapidly. Anything that you're aware of in that respect?
So the cordyceps mushroom has been studied, specifically, and shown to increase VO2 max, increase ATP production, and actually enhance lactic acid clearance, right? And so the question is, what in the mushroom is doing that? And very likely, most of that is happening because of the cordycepin itself. There are some polysaccharides in the mushroom that also increase ATP production.
Because of the adenosine, right?
Yes, exactly. And so the cordycepin, again, works just like adenosine. So you can actually make something called cordycepin triphosphate. So if you don't have adenosine to go in there, like it'll actually make cordycepin triphosphate, which gives you energy directly. So it's called CTP actually overall. And so there is some evidence, at least clinically, that we've seen it, not in studies yet, by stacking it with things like creatine, for example, can be very, very helpful, because then you have, again, the same way, you have the recycling of the phosphate groups, right? And so we are doing that and seeing significant benefit. Now, the key, as you kind of alluded to earlier too, is that you feel sleepy when you take it, right? So the idea is that you have to block some of those adenosine receptors in the brain, or work out very quickly after taking it. And if you take it and work out very quickly afterwards, most of that is going to go to energy production, making cordycepin triphosphate specifically, and then modulating all the other adenosine receptors, right? So you have multiple different types of adenosine receptors in the body overall, not just, one or two. I think there's like 4 or 5 overall specifically. Some are anti-inflammatory, some increase vasodilation, nitric oxide production, BDNF increases, things like that as well.
I'm assuming you don't mean work out quickly after you take it, like you must work out at a very fast pace. You mean like work out shortly after you take it?
Shortly after, yeah. So your time frame after taking it needs to be small. You could do a fast workout, but make sure it's a good workout. Don't rush.
Yeah. Okay. So with the cordymmune, the trommune that has the cordycepin in it, is there anything else in there that you stack it with?
So that's only cordycepin specifically. So it's pure cordycepin at different strengths. We have something called, Tromune, which is 75 milligrams. And then you have troplusmune, which is for practitioners only. That's 150 milligrams of cordycepin per troche. But the thing about the mushroom, right, as I was mentioning earlier, is that in a mushroom, you have 0.03% cordycepin. So you would have to eat like a huge amount of mushroom to get anywhere near the amount of cordycepin that we're putting in these products. In fact, it's the most cordycepin in any other product out there on the market right now. If you find cordycepin out there, it's typically going to be in sort of mushroom blends, like standardized to a certain amount. But we went directly the synthesis pathway. So once Dr. Ted did the initial research, we figured out the power of this thing to work in so many different ways, as we've been alluding to here. We decided to synthesize it, with a lab and make it at a higher potency that's ever been made, ever before. And so, like, if you were going to eat the mushroom, you'd have to have like 80 grams or 150 grams of mushroom itself to get the amount of cordycepin that we're putting in these compounds or these particular products. But we also talk about stacking it a lot, Ben, right? So the idea is like, if you're optimizing your immune system, decreasing inflammation, your immune system activating, right? So you're doing all these great things to help the system. Like, what else can you do to also do those kinds of things, right? So like some of the other products that we use at the company, things like our Tro-Z, for example, to help with sleep. A combination that I use a lot in patients is a combination of Tro-Z with Tromune, because you have the Tro-Z that has 8 different ingredients in it that are supporting sleep, and then you have the Tromune, which is going to obviously be increasing deep sleep too. So you're basically stacking additional cordycepin on the Tro-Z with additional from Tromune.
With the synthesis of it,
yeah,
like you guys are able, like there's no difference in what you get from a bunch of interns in the back room, like stomping on cordyceps and collecting it in like wooden buckets versus synthesizing it.
No. So, I mean, obviously it's going to be cleaner than stomping on buckets and trying to find some cordycepin in there somewhere. But it's the same molecule. It's the same exact molecule that you'd found in the actual mushroom itself. But, we've just done it at scale, right? And doing it at scale it was the key for us, right? Because we want to make sure we had enough instead of having to go through a huge amount of mushroom. Initially, we looked at extracting it from the mushroom, but it's a laborious process, kind of like stamping, like you were just describing, kind of thing. And so you really want to find a way to not have to do it that way if you want to have this much in a product overall. I mean, there's lots of various conditions where cordycepin has been studied, and we talked about cancer, which is very exciting overall. Talked about deep sleep, which is something that you've measured as well, Ben, and seen, and I see very regularly, for example.
Just realized that this morning.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
And there's also some additional things to mention. And so, there's also been studied in wound healing specifically, and increasing wound healing. And we think this is related to, again, adenosine receptors in wounds and increasing fibroblast production and making these wounds heal better. There's also some studies, even at least in animals, in neurodegenerative diseases, which is not terribly surprising overall, because, when you're increasing the immune system activation in a positive way, you're decreasing inflammation. There's also some evidence that cordycepin increases your NRF2 pathways, which are pathways that are upregulated when you make more antioxidants as well. And so, really, it's like the way I think about it is that, and I've been working a lot with patients that have chronic complex medical issues and chronic inflammation. And they're just doing fantastically well with it. They take it at night, and they increase their deep sleep. And they really, obviously, it may not be the only thing they're taking. It's definitely not going to be, right? But it's something that really have found to be a game changer for so many people overall.
Is there any downside here, like elevation of liver enzymes or anything you've come across as far as people who might not want to take it? Yeah,
there really isn't any. So the cordycepin specifically, so what it's doing is immune system modulating it and helping and enhance the immune system activation. So if you have an autoimmune condition where if your immune system is already overactive, there's the theoretical that it could make the system be more overactive in some ways, and you wouldn't want to take it, right? So if you have an autoimmune condition, you want to be careful when you start taking it. So if you have like lupus or Sjogren's disease or something else like that, where you have like your immune system fighting yourself, then you have to be careful taking it overall. So, I mean, the studies on cordycepin and its safety are very, very good overall. I think that the other piece of it that we mentioned is like not as significant of a side effect, but it can make you feel sleepy. So you want to make sure you're taking it at night typically, unless you're taking a low dose and you're kind of being active, relatively quickly after using it to keep that adenosine going in the right direction. There's really very few downsides to it overall. I feel like it's one of the things where we talk about mushrooms a lot now. I know, Ben, and their capacity with so many different aspects. And I think cordycepin as the active here is just very, very powerful. Really, the way I think about it is as something to increase deep sleep, to decrease inflammation, to enhance immune system function, and then, for the exercise performance aspect to things as well. So those are kind of the four ways that I'm typically thinking about it. And it's a mainstay for almost all of my patients now overall. And for my own personal stack as well, because of that, for those capacities.
Yeah, it's my understanding that a lot of the immune supporting benefits of mushrooms come from some of the beta glucans that you find in more of the whole mushroom body. So I'm assuming if someone was using cordycepin that's synthetically created in a lab to have really high concentrated versions, that you would still encourage like regular consumption of things like, some of the biggies like shiitake, maitake, chaga, reishi, either like powdered teas or whole mushroom or something like that to get some of the other parts of the mushroom they might not be getting from cordycepin?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I feel like there's so much power in looking at things from a holistic perspective, right? It's not just one thing that's going to help you. I know cordycepin feels like this sort of like amazing compound, and it is, right? But it's not the only thing out there. And the other thing that I've noticed over time is that, especially if you're not using it for like a significant sort of anti-cancer reason or like significant autoimmune thing that you're getting watched closely by a practitioner, it is best to actually, it seems best to actually, what's it called? Go on and off the cordycepin. So to cycle. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Is I found that if it seems like the body, like everything, like sometimes what I found is that it's better to actually cycle it on and off. And that's how the body remains to have like the significant effect that it does. Because I think what can happen if you're taking it too regularly, at too high of a dose, and this is from personal experience, is that it doesn't seem to work as well when you do have more of a subjective, exposure of some sort. So I found it's better to take it for a period of time, take it for 2 or 3 weeks at the most, and then go off for a little while, or use it more targeted, like when you're traveling or when there are people that are sick around you, and you don't want to get sick. It can really be helpful there overall. So it's best to cycle overall rather than staying on it, every day, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a pretty good tip, though, back when you talked about exercise and adenosine and sleep drive, because there's at least 2 days of the week where, they're easier workout days for me. And I do notice I'm less exhausted when I get into bed. So even just like using it on a couple of nights like that, seems like it could come in pretty handy.
Yeah, it definitely can. And we have a couple people that have actually reported exactly that overall when they don't have as much exercise going on. And the travel one is big overall. And just because when people are moving around and they're on airplanes and like there's lots of fun things flying around those airports and airplanes with you. Like I've seen a significant improvement in my patients. So like my usual stack for patients that are traveling, they travel with methylene blue and they travel with Troimmune. Those are the two. And then for most of my patients that have, mitochondrial challenges, that's when I'm starting off is typically the methylene blue. Low doses 4, 8, 16 milligrams, and then the Troimmune at night. And then I usually titrate their dose over time. So it doesn't start off at the 75 milligram dose, which is in the Troimmune, start off at a quarter of the troche and then kind of see how they feel and kind of go from there. But, they're my mainstays at this point in how I work with people. And I've just seen transformative things in my own patient population. The goal always been, and I know this is the goal for you too, is that we have a lot of fancy things around us all the time. We have fancy tools, technologies. Cordycepin is, part of that, right? But if we have to work on our basics as well, we have to work on our foundational lifestyle, our diet, our supplementation that is focused on what we need, not just what we like to take. And so cordycepin is one of the things that I can add on in patients very quickly to help them feel better, give them additional immune support. But I'm really trying to fix their gut, optimize their hormones, work on their stress, their sleep, and so that they don't need these things as much over the long term. That's the goal, right?
Yeah, I hear you. So explain this to me. Like I've talked with Dr. John Lawrence before, for example. He has a product that probably competes with yours a little bit. Great guy. I think you know him too. And he told me that you could just swallow them, like the bars or the troches. I think he calls his bars. Yours are called troches. I don't know if there's a difference. You could probably tell me.
Nope.
But Can you get the benefits and they just come on more slowly if you swallow it, or do you really have to dissolve it? I think the last podcast you told me upper area between the lip and the gums is the best place to do it based on the thickness of that membrane. Like, what's the difference between swallowing and letting it dissolve?
So the upper cheek and gum, between that area, your mucosa is about 8 layers of thickness. And so compared to like your lower lip where you're underneath your tongue, that's 1. So you have more mucosa up here in the upper cheek and gum. And so what that allows, if you have a troche like we do, you can put it up there, you can park it there, and most of that ingredient is going to get into the bloodstream through your vascular system inside your cheek. Your cheeks are highly vascular overall. And as a result of that, you get into the system faster. Now, it depends on the product. It depends on the compound. In essence, cordycepin, for example, cordycepin is not as bioavailable as something like methylene blue, which we'll talk about. So cordycepin is better dissolved in the mouth because more of that is going to get into the system. The bioavailability means how much of that compound is getting into the body after you put it into your mouth or you swallow it, right? And so cordycepin has a higher bioavailability in the mouth as dissolved in a buccal troche compared to swallowing it and going through digestion. And so that's in contrast to something like methylene blue, where methylene blue is just about 100% bioavailable, no matter whether you take it in the mouth and park it there, or if you swallow it. Okay. The difference, though, is going to be how fast it works. And in some people, what they'll find is that if they dissolve methylene blue in their mouth, they're going to feel better faster. And this could be people with, brain fog, concentration problems, fatigue, the executive function kinds of things. Well, they'll find that if they dissolve in the mouth, they do better than if they swallow it. But that's really just because of how fast overall, Ben. But what I would also say is that John's products are much higher doses than ours. Like he has things that are 75, 100 milligrams, 150 milligrams. I think it's 150 milligrams per one of his bars compared to one of our troches, which is 16. So dissolving something of ours in the mouth compared to his is it's like you'll be blue for days if you do something like his, that high a dose in the mouth. You'd never want to do that overall.
All right. Well, somebody out there is wondering, including me. So what if you put it up your butt?
Yeah. So you don't want to put ours up your butt because there's also in our troches, there's a little bit of peppermint in the formula, and that's not going to feel good. From a delivery perspective, up the butt is a fantastic way to get medications and supplements in because it's a highly vascular location, just like your cheek, for example, right? And so we created, the products at Transcriptions, as you know, Ben, in buccal form because, again, it's faster to get into the system. Most ingredients are going to be more bioavailable in the mouth compared to swallowing them. And so, for example, we talked about cordycepin here, but our sleep formula is the same thing. You can swallow it for sure, but it's going to be faster. And it's also, the ingredients are going to be more potent if you dissolve them in the mouth. And we've known this, compounding pharmacies have used troches for years and years. And the other thing that's nice about them too is that they're titratable. You can start with a quarter or a half or a full. And so whether you're dissolving in the mouth or swallowing it, you can actually, in either case, figure out your exact dose rather than having to take like the whole thing the first time. Although for some people like you, Ben, I know the whole thing is kind of, your MO. So
yeah, I've done that a few times, sometimes with interesting results. The personal, what do they say now? That my lived experience is that dissolving it in the mouth seems like I get way better results.
And that's what it comes down to, right? Because and so many people out there have pill fatigue as well, and they're taking so many pills, they just don't want to take any more. So we designed this in a way that you can just dissolve it in the mouth.
It's like dry powdering without the coughing.
Yeah. Well, please don't do that, people. I don't think that's a good idea in general. But unless you're very skilled at these kinds of things. But what I love about the troches is that I can break them up so easily. And so I can even give like the Trommune to my kids, for example, which I do all the time when they start feeling that something's not, going very well. They don't feel very good. I mean, like if you're going to work with kids and give it to kids, I recommend working with a provider. Of course, we only sell to adults as far as how things go, but we know that it's a very safe molecule. But even my kids will dissolve in the mouth and they don't mind. It's not like, it's a big deal overall. It's easier to swallow, especially if you're young. So I think that troches are not easy to make overall, and they're not easy to scale and make it into a company as we have, but we know the power of them overall, right? So titratable, rapid acting, and more bioavailable, except for that one, which is the methylene blue, which is an important one because of all things that are going to be shocking to the mouth, methylene blue is going to be your most shocking, mostly.
Yeah, it's a little noticeable. Okay, so the kimono for me, man, like you've always got some kind of crazy thing. Like you taught me about cordycepin the last time we chatted. What else is Dr. Ted working on in his secret Batman labs over there?
So we are working on many different things. We have a newer version of our sleep troche that's available, Trozy, out for practitioners now only, called Tro Plus Somna. And this one specifically, again, just available to practitioners. So if you're not a practitioner, you can email our team and we can help you find one. But the cool thing about this is that it's combining 3 different ingredients that are working on the GABA system. And I think we talked about this last time overall, Ben, but we have this cool patent pending strategy called obli pairing or obligate pairing, which means when we're looking at the GABA receptor, what Dr. Ted and our company has done is figure out that there's a better way to support the GABA receptor. Most people take things that will enhance GABA in various ways, but they can deplete GABA over time. So the idea is that the receptor, you have a binding location where GABA binds, and you have locations where other molecules will bind. Things like kava or CBD and CBG, which are in some of our other formulas. They bind to other sites on the GABA receptor and increase the affinity for GABA to bind. The problem, though, is if you're not giving something that can actually replete GABA itself, over time, you're actually going to deplete GABA. So what we did in these formulas is find something that actually binds to where GABA would bind on the receptor, mimicking GABA or actually like GABA itself, or so something like nicotinol GABA, which is vitamin B3, attached to the GABA is actually giving the body GABA itself. But in essence, you have something that's binding to where GABA would bind and something that's binding to a separate site on the receptor that's enhancing GABA to bind it there as well. And that combination is called an obligate pair.
Yeah, you're almost like combining stimulation and disinhibition.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Like, so the idea of stimulation and then also just creating a substrate. Like you have stimulation that's making a substrate bind to a receptor. But the problem is that you can deplete that substrate. And many people are actually depleted in that substrate already, in this case being GABA. If your GABA deficiency is very common, if you have sleep issues, anxiety, depression, these are all oftentimes related to GABA deficiency. And so if you're giving something that's trying to stimulate the GABA system, but you don't have enough GABA around, you're going to get into trouble over time. Your receptors are going to try to reorganize themselves and downregulate themselves, and you can get issues with tolerance, withdrawal, dependence. This is alcohol, for example. This is benzodiazepines. This is sleep medications, right? They work, but they also have significant downside over time because they're depleting GABA pretty dramatically and then causing all of this. And so in the Tro Plus Somna formulation, we have 3 different things that are working on the GABA receptor. We have agarin, which is in the sleep troche as Trozy as well. Agarin's from another mushroom, the psychedelic mushroom, the Amanita mushroom, as you probably remember. Yeah, but it's at double the dose in Tro Plus Somna. And then we have DHHB, dihydrohanochiol beta, which is the most active form of magnolia bark or hanochiol.
Like the old Chinese traditional medicine insomnia cure.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And so the most active form of that is hanochiol or hanochiol. Sorry, the active form is dihydrohanochiol beta, DHHB. And then we have the third ingredient there is apigenin, which you've probably heard of before as well. It's in chamomile and other tea and some green leafy other vegetables. But apigenin is an antioxidant. So it's a mitochondrial support, but it also works on the GABA system as well. So that's the newest one that just came out recently, just in May of 2025, when this is being recorded, actually, just last week.
You sent me some and I tried one, and I probably made the mistake of using it when I was traveling. So I had the whole thing happen where I woke up in the hotel room and had no clue where I was because I was so just dead asleep. So it knocked me on my ass. Yeah. So, I mean, the downside, if there was a fire in the hotel, I'd be screwed. But yeah, I mean, that stuff works. That's for sure.
Well, the idea with that whole formulation was to actually make something strong enough to knock almost anybody out, right? But in a very safe way, in a very comprehensive way. And that's how we do things at the company, right? The idea is we're not trying to pay Peter to pay Paul, whatever the analogy is. So we're working on that. That's that's a very, very, I think very effective formula, especially if people have really bad sleep issues that really don't want to be on pharmaceuticals or want to have something that's more natural. If your sleep issues aren't that bad overall and you just need a little bit of help, Trozy is fantastic for that. It really does help for most people. So we've been working on that. I'm trying to think what else we're working on. I think that the other main thing that we're really working on, and I alluded to this in the beginning of our podcast, is the idea of creating and helping practitioners of the future, right? Trying to help people, really become well versed in understanding how they can leverage things like AI in their own clinical practices. And our whole nonprofit, the Health Optimization Medicine and Practice company, is focused on creating practitioners of the future. So we're teaching people how to optimize health. We're using things like metabolomics, hormone analysis, gut health, and in shifting all those networks to when you were 21 to 30 years of age. Focused on not the organ-based system, but the holobiont system, the system of how, we are these holoorganisms that are made up of humans and human cells and viruses and fungus and bacteria, and how we can optimize all those. So our main driver always been, as you know, is to try to, work on foundational health principles overall, because if we're doing that, then everything else gets better. I mean, we have a company, we have prescriptions that's available to help people right now while they're on the longer path to optimizing their health. But in essence, the longer path requires support too, right? And that's what health optimization medicine and practice is all about. So that company has been growing really fast. We have more and more practitioners that are getting trained in our framework. And we do it in a way where we have cohort style, where we have like our metabolomics module, which is our primary module, our foundational one. 3 times a year, we have small groups of students that go in with us. We meet every week for a lesson. We talk about the lesson of the week. We have case presentations. We have journal clubs. And then we're going to be starting to do with some of the other modules as well. So that's our big push this year. It's been going on for a while under the surface, but we're really trying to get out there and make it happen this year.
Yeah. If I'm not a doctor, am I allowed to take it? Or do you need to be a board certified physician?
No, you don't have to be a board certified physician. You can, any kind of practitioner working with clients.
I personally like to geek out on that stuff sometimes myself.
Yeah, I know. And I know you see clients as well, the way you do things, Ben. But the way we do it is different than functional medicine. Functional medicine is focused on root causes of illness, and that's important. It's obviously better than conventional medicine, which is focused on band-aids and really great at acute care, really bad at prevention and long-term care overall. So health optimization medicine, the framework is looking at for the root causes of health. How can we optimize and keep you healthy? And so we actually have a big drive here as well, like within the new, this sort of new framework now that's involved with the administration. It's, well, what if you had a new system entirely that wasn't run by the American Medical Association, the American Cardiac Association, the American Heart Association, excuse me. Like these are organizations that are focused on really just treating diseases overall. So what we're really trying to advocate for is let's create a whole new system where we can find, organizations like ours that are focused on optimizing the health of the patients and clients that the doctors and practitioners that are using, that are getting trained in that system. So this is the metabolic health framework as well. And there's metabolic health companies or organizations out there that are doing something similar. But what if we had a whole new system that wasn't being relegated or being regulated by systems that are just focused on disease? So these are big missions, but these are ones that we're really involved with now and really hoping for seeing some change this year.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to support, man. I'll link to all that. I'll link to that in the show notes. For those of you who want to try these crazy troches, proceed at your own risk with that sleep one. Jeez.
Yeah, Troplus is specifically only for people with really significant sleep issues, but Troplus Mune and Trommune are very, very well tolerated and easy to integrate into a program.
All right, bengreenfieldlife.com/share. Dr. Scott's last name, you guys. bengreenfieldlife.com/SHERR. Check out these troches. Leave your questions, your comments, and your feedback in the show notes. You can also leave a review and anything else you want to say, pipe in over there. I read them all. So, Dr. Scott, thanks for coming back on for a two-peat, and I'll link to our other show and the show with Dr. Ted, again, at bengreenfieldlife.com/share, SHERR.
Do you want free access to comprehensive show notes, my weekly roundup newsletter, cutting-edge research and articles, top recommendations from me for everything that you need to hack your life, and a whole lot more? Check out bengreenfieldlife.com/share. bengreenfieldlife.com. It's all there. bengreenfieldlife.com. See you over there. Most of you who listen don't subscribe, like, or rate this show. If you're one of those people who do, then huge thank you. But here's why it's important to subscribe, like, and or rate this show. If you do that, that means we get more eyeballs, we get higher rankings, and the bigger the Ben Greenfield Life show gets, the bigger and better the guests get, and the better the content I'm able to deliver to you. So hit subscribe, leave a ranking, leave a review if you got a little extra time. It means way more than you might think. Thank you so much.